Hello, everybody. We've got people in. Great. Can I introduce you to Baroness Warsi? Can I call you Sayeeda?
You can call me what you want.
Great.
As long as it's watershed.
Can I call you a politician or a businesswoman or a stand-up comedian or a civil rights activist or all of the above? Is it all right if we have a natter about which one you might be?
Yeah, or what runs through all of them.
Yeah.
Probably, my dad would probably say just being a pain in the butt, but I think a campaigner.
Yeah.
I think probably in all of those bits, you know, the lawyer, the politician, the work that I now do now, it is finding a platform to be able to have your voice heard on the issues that matter to me.
Yeah. So, have you ever had a night out in Hull?
I have. You know, I was thinking, I came here in the late 80s to a club.
Yes, we need to guess the club.
And I can't remember the name of this club. It was on a corner and very dark, but then, yeah, okay, most clubs are dark. And it was upstairs. It was definitely upstairs. Did it have 2 floors? You know, I can't. I'm menopausal at the moment, so I've got no kind of recollection of anything that happened 30 seconds ago. But I definitely came to this place in the late 80s when I was at uni. We jumped in the car one day and we all drove down, and I don't drink. So I'm like that crazy person in the club that's stone cold sober. Just remember trying to have really intelligent conversations with people in this club and saying, "Oh, hello. So what's your take on life?" You know, it's like, "What? Do you want to go out with me?" So yeah, I just remember thinking, "Oh, what an interesting place."
Great. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. But we came to Hull before then.
All right.
There's this. I should have bought the picture actually. So when the Humber Bridge was first opened, and my dad's one of these kind of people who consistently, everything is an education. From the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed, every single thing that he's talking to you about is about giving you an education. And when the Humber Bridge first opened, he told us about this great engineering achievement and how it had broken all these records. And he said, right, I'm taking you to see the Humber Bridge, and I'm one of 5 girls. And, you know, just like one literally kind of every 2 years. And my mum, you know, in kind of typical South Asian mum way, decided that this was going to be a day out. And she dressed us up in these really pretty silk outfits with scarves and the whole lot. And there's photos of us literally freezing our backsides off, walking along Humber Bridge with these scarves flowing in the background, where my dad was teaching us a lesson about this great engineering achievement, and my mum decided to dress us up in silk.
So I've heard you're on an ISIS hit list, is that right?
Yeah, actually, I couldn't have some water, could I? Sorry.
Please.
Yeah, so I bet you're all glad you turned up
Oh,
today.
God, yeah.
Yeah, did they tell you that before you
We would
turned
have had
up?
the Swanland Scouts here if we'd have known that.
It started about 5 years ago, where, probably a little bit longer actually, because I remember my daughter was doing her A-levels at the time. I got a call from the Home Office to say that they'd picked up some chatter on various kind of chat sites about certain people in the UK being targeted. So this was the time when we were making it quite difficult for people to travel to Syria and Iraq. And so they put out a circular to say, if you can't travel, then in each of your countries, and this was a worldwide list, in each of your countries there are certain people that you should target. And I was one of 7 in the UK who were on this hit list.
Very comforting.
You know, I kind of took it, thank you, you've either got to just kind of joke about it, which is what I do a lot of now, because otherwise it can take over your life, and it did. It changed our life because it changed everything in the way we live. Lots of things around the house had to change. I had to carry a personal alarm. I had to let the police know when I was traveling to places, and you know what the kind of arrangements were. Just knowing exit and entry kind of points when you went to places. But there was an upside. I mean, my kids had wanted a dog for years. And they kept saying, can we have a dog? Can we have a dog? No, you can't have a dog. We haven't got time. It's bad enough looking after you guys. We're not going to look after a dog. And then the police, one of the things they advised us, thank you, one of the things they advised us of was to say, look, we can put all these measures in place and we can get an armed response to you if anything happened, but the best thing you could do is have a really well-trained angry dog, which can also kind of double up as a pet. So we ended up buying this really clever Alsatian. And the kids were like, yes, Mum's on a kill list. We've finally got a pet. So yeah, there was some upside to it all. So we ended up with a dog. But yeah, it's an odd way to live your life. But then, if you fundamentally believe in something, I'm not going to stop saying what I believe in because some crazy people out there decide that they want to bully me into shutting up.
Good for you. To the film, because you've helped us with a film.
Yeah.
The music, because this is Desert Island Discs meets Piers Sewell's life stories. I've told you that. Mm-hmm. So the music's Whitney's moment. What caused that?
There's there's kind of a sad and an optimistic story behind that track for me, because I in my 20s was in quite an unhappy marriage and couldn't really see a way out of it, and this track used to really give me that, and always knew that I had to find a way out of it, and that there would be a moment when I really could just be me and my version of myself, which I definitely wasn't in that marriage. And I think this song always kind of it just gave me that sense of hope to say there will come that kind of one moment in time when I will just be allowed to be me. So it kind of still takes me back to that moment, but it also gives me a huge amount of hope and optimism, and yes, it still means a lot to me.
So the image that went around the world was you stood in front of 10 Downing Street in traditional dress. That must mean a lot to you as well.
Yeah, and it wasn't well thought out, looking back on it. It was, this was, lots of you remember, 2010, we had this election, no obvious result, we got to the end of it, and nobody won overall control, Labour was still trying to remain in power, we were trying to form a coalition, and so, normally you'd get the election and then you'd get a result in a government. It just didn't happen, and for days we were just sitting around waiting for something to happen in terms of the election. And what happens when a government is formed is that you get a call from Downing Street and they say, the Prime Minister would like to see you, and that's it. And then you get called and you go to number 10 and then you're told what job, if any, you're going to be given. And for literally for about 12 months before then, we'd been absolutely exhausted. We'd been out campaigning. I hadn't been to the shops. I hadn't done anything, in terms of having clothes. And so I hadn't bought any new clothes. And when I was appointed and invited to the first cabinet meeting, I remember looking in my wardrobe and thinking, right, okay, there's nothing new. And this particular outfit, my sister had made for me. And it was nice and pressed, and it was sat there in the wardrobe. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I thought, right, I'll wear it. And I do not, I wear a combination of clothes. I'll sometimes, I'll be in a dress, I'll be in a skirt suit, I'll be in jeans, I'll be in traditional outfits, and I just mix and match depending on what the weather's like, what I feel like that day. So I just wore it because it was a nice day, and I don't think for 1 minute I anticipated, the reaction I would get to it. And I remember walking down Downing Street. And I had a Mac, I had a beige Mac over the top of it. And the journalist said, can you take your Mac off? We'd like to take a photo, because they realised I wasn't wearing a grey suit, I had a pink outfit on. And so I took my coat off, and then they wanted to take a photo, and I looked across at the police officer, because I thought, I can't be holding this coat. And he just went, I'm not holding your coat for you. So I thought, I can't put it on the floor, because I could hear my mum's voice going, don't you throw your coat on the floor. So I ended up hanging it on the railings outside number 10. And so there's this picture of me on the front pages of all these newspapers with my coat hung up on the railings of number 10 and me just stood there in this pink kind of shalwar kameez. And it's, I think it was a coming of age in many ways, because the number of emails I got from people afterwards who said, a lot of people of colour and a lot of, young people who were born and raised in Britain but were kind of crossing boundaries of culture and ethnicities, almost had different versions of their life. So you had like your home version and your school version and your friends version. And a lot of your time you kept those things apart because you were trying to keep various parts of your life kind of happy. And that was a moment where, in a way, it was a way of saying all the bits of my life have come together, and this is me, kind of good, bad, and ugly.
But the dress was an accident, basically.
Yeah.
Was it an accident when they sat you next to the Nick Griffin of the BNP? Because that's the question time.
That was
image.
question time image. Yeah. So that was the moment where Nick Griffin, for the first time, was called onto national TV to do question time, and there was a big debate about it. Some people said, oh, we shouldn't have had him on, and other people were saying it's absolutely right to hear what he has to say. And they actually sat me next to him originally. So the original seat plan was to sit me next to him, and I, as you can see, I use my hands a lot when I talk. And I thought there'll be a moment in the middle of this question time where I will be like, and I look like I'm about to slap him around the back of his head, and it looks so aggressive. So I said, look, can I sit opposite him almost? Can you put me at the other end? So they put me at the other end, which allowed me to kind of be quite forceful in my arguments against him and use my hands, but not make it look like I was about to fisticuff him, really. So yeah.
Well, that was the first time he came to my attention. I thought, what ballsy woman.
Yeah. Well, I just thought Nick Griffiths, the rubbish he taught. I mean, he was talking about, being British and patriotic and British values and effectively saying to people like me who he thought were not really British and patriotic. And both my I've got a really fascinating history. Both my grandfathers, my paternal and maternal grandfather, served in the British Indian Army and fought in the Second World War. And I had an uncle who was taken a prisoner of war, and huge swathes of the family were part of that war effort, the Allied war effort. And I just thought, your forefathers, ideological forefathers, Nick, were the very fascists that my forefathers were actually fighting. So what makes you patriotic, and what makes you think that you're going to put you're going to ask me for a loyalty test when you're the very kind of fascist ideology that my forefathers were fighting even before they'd hit these shores? And I think it was that moment of just being so incensed to say, I'm not going to take this rubbish from you. Yeah. That he just needed to hear. But we needed to do it in a way where we said, look, we can have conversations about what Britain means and what our values are, but let's not do it in this vacuum of not understanding our own history.
The key is, though, when you get angry, is to make sure that people don't think about your behaviour, they think about his. So I don't think that's a trick I could pull off, so you did really well.
Yeah, so I did fisticuff him. But I think you have to take on these arguments.
Absolutely.
Because, they're discussions we're still having today. What does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be patriotic? I mean, we were talking earlier, that my only birth child, as I call it, so I have kids that I've inherited. I don't like the word stepchildren, but but the only child that I actually physically had, is now back in the armed forces, and she's back on the front line. She's a medic, and I find it quite difficult, I think, when we have these conversations, because I just think that they're sometimes painted as so black and white, and they're not. And the definition of who we are as a nation, what our values are, and what we represent is far more complex than these lazy arguments we often hear about, in the newspapers and in the media.
So one of those images was you at Joe Cox's funeral.
Yes, which again brings us back to this conversation. I mean, very kind of topical again, because Batley and Spen is a seat that's just been fought as a by-election now because of what happened with with Tracy Brabin being appointed the Yorkshire Mayor. And already you've got, I think, Lawrence Fox is sniffing around. You've got George Galloway, who's declared. I mean, here are the polar extremes once again finding themselves in this city where we lost somebody like Joe to the hands of extremism. And I just feel like we have to consistently keep pushing back the space so that people can have these conversations in a way which are far more nuanced and sophisticated, rather than the black and white way in which some of this stuff is painted. I think they've even got that woman, what's she called, Jade and something or the other, the one that I think, confronted Nicola Sturgeon. Is it
Oh, right, yeah.
Britain First or something? So she's even said she's coming to stand. And I just think it's disgusting that where we lost a member of parliament, first time after, we'd lost it to Northern Irish terrorism, here we have people with such extreme views wanting to, represent that constituency.
Sure. So the final one, I think, was in the House of Lords.
Yes.
At the tender age of 36, which is probably about half the qualifying age to get in there, isn't it?
Yeah, the average age in the House of Lords is 69. It was 69 when I joined. It's now 71.
So which was it? Was it being a Muslim or having a Yorkshire accent echoing around those chambers? Which created the biggest fuss?
You know what created the biggest fuss was that I was 36 and on the front bench. So I arrived straight onto the front bench, and I could hear people chuntering on my own benches behind me, thinking, bloody upstart, who does she think she is, and actually just not knowing the rules. And to some extent, Paul, not caring about what the rules are. Because for a lot of, look, I grew up in a really strong working class home. You don't know what the rules are. And the rules are usually set in place not to advantage people like me or you even. And so to some extent... Were
they inclined to make you feel uncomfortable? Did you feel uncomfortable?
I think me being there made other people feel uncomfortable.
Great.
Because you're upsetting the status quo, aren't you? But eventually, I went in at the age of 36, having had a legal career and a business career, and set up a charity, and done all sorts of amazing things. And yet suddenly there were all these people looking at me thinking, oh, well, you need to prove yourself again, girl. And it literally was, that kind of attitude. And some of this, silly stuff, you had to hear in the early days.
So are you pro-reform of the Lords?
It has to change. Come on, you cannot have a chamber of 800 plus people, most of them, past the best, at a time where, and I say this with all respect to my colleagues, right? You cannot have this chamber and then for life. At 36, I was given a job and have now got it for life. How does that work? I could be, I could completely go off the rails by the time I'm 46 or 56, but I can still go there. And it's still a rich man's club, because it's not a full-time job. It doesn't have a salary. It doesn't have an office. It doesn't carry a pension. Well, how do you expect people in their 30s who've still got families to bring up and a mortgage to pay? How do you expect them to go in and do that? And when they do that role properly. So I definitely think the chamber should not be more than about 400 people. It should definitely be smaller than the House of Commons. We should definitely have terms, and they should be 10-year terms, maybe with a view to renewing it for a second 10-year term. But more than 20 years, I think you've kind of done your time and served your bit. It should be a professionalised role as a proper role, even if it's a part-time role, but it should be a professionalised role. And every form of reform that various governments of whatever colours have brought in hasn't worked, because it requires people to effectively retire.
So you're on the Conservative bench in the Lords, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you ever feel as if you're in the wrong party?
I think all of us at the moment feel like we're in the wrong party. I think we've got Labour running around Labour colleagues thinking I'm in the wrong party. I think you've got Liberal Democrats thinking, what is our purpose? You've got Tory colleagues thinking, where the hell has my party gone off to? I think there's a lot of people who I would classify as economically conservative, socially liberal, who would find themselves in a nice centre ground place where they would just be as comfortable with maybe Tony Blair or Nick Clegg or David Cameron, now don't feel themselves very comfortable in any of the three political parties, to be fair. But I am ultimately a conservative, and I don't agree with some of the stuff that my party does, but I'm not prepared to just leave them to it, because internal opposition is as important as external opposition, especially when the external opposition, and I'm not making a party political point, but when the external opposition is so rubbish and it's not doing its job, I think it needs strong people within it. The party's changed a lot. If you go back to the 2010 cabinet that I served in, who did I sit alongside? I sat alongside, Ken Clarke and Dominic Grieve and David Willits and Justine Greening, and these were like amazing, earthy kind of people with lots of experience. Nick Clegg and David, and now it's changed. It's a very different kind of a cabinet.
So you're not going to let the knobheads win then?
Can I say that, watershed moment? I think I'm not going to let them, if you look across the pond, look at what the Republican Party has done to itself, right? It has allowed this crazy person to come in with a whole load of other crazy people around him and take over an amazing traditional centre-right party. And it has ruined it. You know, did we ever think that we would find a Republican Party that no longer believed in democracy, the rule of law, and decided to have a run on the Capitol? I mean, this is what they became. They became some rabid, crazy right-wingers. And what we've got to do is make sure that that doesn't happen here. And we've got to make sure that internally within the party, we make sure that things like democracy, you know, the rule of law, values, basic principles of the way in which this country is run, a free press, you know, a free judiciary, that all of these things are protected. And when I see my colleagues attacking those very basic things, it really worries me, because at any one point we are simply custodians of this country and its values, and that has to be for the long term. And very, very easily, as we saw in the US, a country can slip into really crazy, you know, anarchy behavior, and we've just got to make sure we don't allow that to happen.
So I think we'll have gathered by now we've got a pretty ballsy woman with us. Well, so where does that come from? That upbringing. What happened in that upbringing to make you this brave, ballsy woman?
I think three big things. One, an all-female family, and I don't know if any of you come from all-female families, but yeah, there's this fantastic picture of two sisters about the age of 7 or 8, and one of them has literally gashed the other one and she's bleeding, and the one that's gashed her said, "I didn't even touch her," right? So if you grew up in a room of 5 women and 5 girls who've literally scrapped all the way through life, I think you kind of learn how to fight and to be heard. And also, if you grow up as I did, you know, 5. I mean, the reason there's 5 of us is because my mum and dad kept trying for a boy, and we were born in a society.
Your dad kept trying to get in the bathroom as well, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. We were born in a society, in a culture where girls were not seen as, boys were seen as the preferred child. You know, the male child was the kind of what people were looking for. And I always say that we were born on the wrong side of the balance sheet, because men are seen as assets, girls are seen as liabilities. Men are seen as providers, girls are seen as takers. Men are seen as carrying honor, girls are seen as carrying shame. And so right from day one, you're fighting to say, I matter, and I want to be on the right side of the balance sheet. And so I think that fighting spirit comes very early on. My dad is amazing. I mean, my dad arrived here with 1962, £2 in his pocket, arrived at Heathrow, got a coach to Batley, as you do, and started working double shifts in the mills. So they do 2 shifts back to back because they could make more money that way. And fundamentally, and came from a family, utterly kind of poor family, where when it rained, part of the house used to fall down. They didn't even have brick houses. It was made of loam, I think, so it would just go. And just believed he could do anything. And he let us believe from a very young age that anything was possible. So, you know, if you spoke to him, he'd tell you, I run the world. You know, his other daughter kind of runs the rest of the bits of the world that I don't run. You know, I mean, he just has such self-belief and belief in us. And I think the third thing was that if you come from nothing, you kind of have no option but to start fighting from day one, and also always thinking that it can never be as bad as it was. So, hey, let's take a punt. And I think part of that is just having the gumption to take a punt. And I think in various aspects of my life, at various points of my life, something has come along and I've just asked for I've made a cheeky offer. You know, I mean, if you go back to the legal days, I qualified as a lawyer. I was working for the Crown Prosecution Service, and I got an offer.
What year was that, say?
Oh,
So did you bump into Keir Starmer? Because he was there, wasn't he?
I don't think he was there when I was there. So 96 that was.
Yeah.
And then I got an offer from private practice. I went into work for a private firm, a three office, medium-sized firm. And literally within 6 months of being there, one of the senior partners there took me aside and said, look, people don't know here, but I'm going to leave and I'm going to set up quite a niche specialist practice. And I've seen the way that you've come in and how you're starting to kind of build up a client base very quickly, and would you consider coming and working for me? And I must have been 23, 24. And he said, would you come and consider working for me? And I said, let me think about it. And I came back, and it was a completely cheeky thing to say. And I said, well, look, you're starting a new firm, which is going to be quite specialist and quite niche. And if it's something completely new, why would I come and work for you? Why don't I come and work with you? And why don't I go into partnership with you? And why don't we set up this firm together? 50-50. And I think he looked at me thinking, you cheeky so-and-so, what do you mean? And he went, well, I have goodwill. And I said, yeah, but I have the future. I said, you can bring the past and your experience. I'll bring where this firm goes. And business is about growing this. So and I said, but I'm happy to buy the goodwill or buy into the goodwill that you think you're going to bring, as long as we come to an agreement that I buy into it and I pay you monthly, I thought, out of the income that I earn from the new business, matey. And that's what we did. And
that's some conversation at that age, isn't it?
And I just remember him, what that then did, Paul, was it allowed me to have a stake in the business in the firm that I was working in. I wasn't just a lawyer. And then cheekily, years later, I sold my 50% back to him and went off to do something else. And he ended up buying me out, which kind of put me in a really nice position in my 30s.
So, a little bit more trivial for a minute now, because we do ask the other guests this. What was the first record you bought? Where did you buy it from? And where did you get the money from? Because we reckon here at Business Week 11s, that can tell you a lot about a person.
Okay, so I never bought a record. Never had the money for it.
Well, that's confounding the bloody thing then, isn't it?
Okay, sorry. So the way that we used to listen to music was we used to record it on a tape off the radio.
Oh, cheapskates.
Cheapskates, yeah. So my parents didn't have the money for us to buy records, and it was such a frivolous thing for us to buy, you know. And music was just not the kind of, you know, the thing that they would let us spend money on, not even our pocket money on. So we would wait until the radio came on, and then you'd press record and play, wasn't it, on your tape, and make sure you could try and get the DJ's kind of little yabbering out of it, so you could just get the music bit of it. So I had mixtapes full of all sorts of music that I recorded on the radio for years. Sorry to let you down.
No worries. You've not done up to now. It's the first one. Make it the last one.
Not to let you down.
Your dad seemed pretty cool. Pretty cool businessman.
Yeah.
Describe the business he built, because you've only just sold it, haven't you?
Yeah, I've sold it, yeah.
Describe the
so
business.
he did loads of stuff. So he worked in the mills, then he went on to become a bus conductor, then he became a bus driver, then he became a driving instructor, then he worked in a bread factory because he got banned from driving for a while. So he did all sorts of weird and wonderful jobs. And then eventually set up a small manufacturing business, manufacturing furniture. And then just kind of built on that. About 50 years ago, he set that up, and then just built it and built it and built it. And then eventually we kind of ended up coming into that business. It was manufacturing beds and mattresses. And we did some great marketing around it. We said in Yorkshire we're so tight we squeak, but thankfully our mattresses don't.
That's the strap line, isn't it?
That's the strap line, yeah, it used to be. So it just ended up bringing us into this business quite early on. I remember having to type letters on a typewriter for him when we were quite young. And he's now 84 and still working. So he now has he eventually expanded vertically, so ended up importing and supplying into the manufacturing trade, which he still works and still, in fact, he was out at a meeting, I think, in Birmingham 2 days ago. Amazing guy.
Somebody to really admire then.
Yeah, and he'll never stop working, because in his head, two things. One, he said, what is the point? What am I going to do sat at home? Your mum's going to drive me nuts. And secondly, he said that I think there's a part of him that thinks that he could just get poor again. And that fear of being poor really stays with him. And I remember, so 4 years ago, he had a stroke. He had 2 strokes, and he passed out. And he was given 24 hours to live, and in typical dad style, kind of spent 3 weeks in intensive care, and then came back with absolutely no damage whatsoever. They told us he wouldn't be able to walk, he wouldn't be able to talk, and he could do everything. So kind of came back and defied all kind of medical advice, and went back to work a month after he came out of hospital. And And I just remember when he came round and sitting with him in ICU, and I said to him, I said, Dad, they looked after you so well, you know, amazing care that you've received in the NHS. And I'm sure he was slightly, when you come out of ICU, you're slightly kind of delusional for a while. And they call it intensive care psychosis or something. And he said, in a hushed voice, he took my hand and he went, have you spent all the money? And I went, it's the NHS, Dad, it didn't cost us anything. and he was paranoid that we'd spent all this money on his care and that he was now going to be completely poor again. But I think this fear of being poor is just so deep-rooted in him.
So, obviously a man to be admired. Are there any, which other business people would you admire, or indeed their businesses?
I think for me, it's people who do business but with a purpose. And the way that I've seen my dad do business is that he knew everything about everybody on the shop floor. You know, he knew whose partner was unwell, he knew whose dad was having a hard time, he knew what was happening with their kids, he knew who had a debt problem, he knew who had a health problem. And he always walked the floor. He still walks the floor. And he always walked the floor a number of times a day. And because of that, he knew exactly what was going on with the people in his workforce. And I think that's what I admire. People who I think genuinely know their business and genuinely know the people who are in their business. And I just think that a lot of people don't. You know, a lot of people just, and if you don't know and actually it's great business to know what's going on because you can predict what's about to come down the corner, because if you know somebody's got a poorly partner, you know at some point they're going to have time off work. You know, don't be caught short by all of this stuff. And the other thing is he used to lend money to people. I mean, the funny thing was when he went into ICU 4 years ago, loads of people kept coming to see us to ask us how Dad was. I mean, literally it was like a daily kind of run through of people coming through to see him. And the number of people who came and said, oh, by the way, I owe your dad this money because he lent it to me to buy a house. I owe you. He was literally running his own little specialist non-interest bearing bank, you know, somewhere. And he just lent money to so many people, but people who we thought needed that hand up, you know. So he was, even now, he's a great advocate of, oh yeah, go for it. Go start your own business. Go buy this. Go push for the next level. And I think that's what we need to somehow find again, that gumption.
Well, we certainly need it now, don't we? Because we've got a major economic recovery.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think the potential for us now is huge. The way in which we can think about what the world will look like in the next 10 years is going to change so drastically. And over the last 18 months, change has circumstances have forced us to change the way in which we do business. And anybody can run a business from anywhere. You know, literally, we've proven over the last 18 months, you can sit in your pajamas in your bedroom and run a business. And so I just think that the opportunities are there. It's whether or not our mindset, our education, and the support we get from government can actually all work together in a practical way for outcome. Because I often find, you know, when kind of regional development agencies or LEPs get involved and they talk to business, and I'm thinking, you keep trying to sell me rubbish I don't need because you think that's what you want to sell me. And actually what you should be doing is listening to me and telling you I'm telling you what I want. And I don't want kind of you to give me MVQ3, whatever level training for 3 people. That's not going to help. What I need is that very specialist training for that particular person to help this business grow. And I think this sense of frustration that I get, and I used to get it in government, where I'd be sat around the cabinet table and honestly, some of the conversations we'd be having.
We'd love them, would we?
I remember this conversation once about somebody having this conversation, you know, talking about this, and I won't name him, Michael, who basically said, work out whichever Michael it was, and he'd started telling us about this Jeffersonian theory on investment, which was all about how do you get money into the economy. And I just remember thinking, what are you talking about? And literally within about 3 minutes after he'd finished, Justine Greening, who, I mean, I've got a huge amount of time for, she said, well, if anybody's been watching Coronation Street and seen that so-and-so's building an extension, let me explain how that translates into the low. And I just thought, wow, right, okay, now this is the real economy that we're talking about. And I think I remember a conversation about tachographs once, and people say, what do you know about tachographs? And I said, well, because we've got a fleet of trucks, and you need to know about tachographs when you run trucks. And just the sense of civil servants and a lot of colleagues in government just not knowing how the day-to-day
That obviously affects the relationship
works.
between business and government, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think just not understanding what does it feel like to run a business? What do people worry about? What's that kind of daily grind, especially in manufacturing? And I still feel that there's a gap. I genuinely believe they should have advisors who are still in business alongside.
We've tried that though, haven't we? Yeah. So we're amongst Yorkshire people, which should make you feel comfortable. I have to ask you about the Yorkshire devolution thing and the levelling up thing, whether it's a reality or just another strap line. What's your feelings on that?
Well, levelling up is what we've tried so many times before. I mean, it's a new phrase, but what is it? It's infrastructure to link the north to the south, and it's devolution. And it's, what we've had before, but it now it's a great political strap line. But it still doesn't deal with the kind of underlying issues around productivity and what that means. The single biggest issue of levelling up is housing. It's... until we get that right, I mean, we keep talking about all sorts of things, until we understand what a home is, something that each and every one of us needs to live as fulfilled human beings. And until we understand as a country, how are we going to provide homes, not houses, how are we going to provide homes for future generations? And if we look at, for example, the issue of social housing, I don't know how, when we were growing up, a council house was what you had as a point of last resort. And even for working class people like me, it was, oh, you don't want a council house, you want to go out, you want to be able to buy your own house. And the prospect of buying your own house was real for almost all of us, even poor people when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s. But the chances of people owning their own home, from young people to people in their 30s to people now older people. We've got a crisis where we've got people in housing that don't own their own home and cannot change the structure of their homes as they get older to work for their lifestyles. We've got to find, I think the single biggest issue is to deal with everything around, mental health, productivity, all the rest of it, workless, all of that stuff has got to be about giving people stable homes.
So you think that's the thing that ultimately fuels the social mobility we need?
Absolutely. The minute I owned my own home, I suddenly felt like I had a stake in the society around me, and I was part of something, and it's about control. When I talk to my kids a lot, I don't know if you've had this issue, but my biggest worry about having middle class kids was, would they have the fire in their belly to do what we did? Or would they just get so damn comfortable that actually, they'd start having first world problems? And, and we didn't have, the things that they're worried about. We didn't have those problems because we had real problems of, are we going to have milk until the end of the week? Am I going to be able to buy a new school uniform? We had real issues. And I just felt that my kids wouldn't have real problems and therefore would find problems. And the worry that we had was, how do we kind of make sure that they remain focused on progress? We want the next generation to do better than we did. And the way I used to sell it to them was that, being successful financially is about freedom. It's not just about the money in your pocket. It's about the freedom to make choices. And if you don't have the money in your pocket, you don't have a home as to where you can live that you own, I don't think you have choices. If you're turfed out because the landlord suddenly decides he wants to do something or he wants to sell it, the freedom that's taken away, the choice that's taken away from your life is huge. And I think the minute you give somebody a home, which is their home, and they control that domain and they decide, you know, how well it's kept, and all of that kicks in, and they're not reliant upon somebody else to fix the boil and reliant upon somebody else to fix the damp, and you know, they can determine how they live their lives. That's when you end up with, you know, free people who can then hopefully be their best. It's a big thing for me. I genuinely think there's a big issue about housing in this country, and we've lost control of what that will look like. You know, people in their 30s kicking around, still trying to find a place that they can call their own. Whereas in my era, it was just natural that, you know, you went to university. If you went to university, you got a job, and then you bought a house.
Can we move on to the author bit?
Yeah, the book.
The book. How was it? 2018, 2017?
17.
The Enemy
Within.
Well, why do you write it?
Because
it's not a memoir, is it?
No, it's not a memoir. No. So the introduction is a little bit of kind of history about me, but it's not an autobiography. It's called The Enemy Within, A Tale of Muslim Britain. And I felt that the story of Islam and Britain and Muslims in Britain needed to be written, because there's such a big misunderstanding. And so it's written in very blunt Yorkshire terms, starting from, you know, who are they? Who are the Muslims? You know, are they coming to get us? Are they about to invade us? How long does this journey go back? What is the relationship between Islam and Britain? And just put it into context. You know, going back. I got
the feeling it was to answer the question, where can my grandkids call home?
Yeah.
Do you think you got to that?
I got to the end of it thinking these are really deeply troubling times.
Right. Disconcerting process.
Yeah. So it starts off with who are they, who are we? Yeah. Then there's a middle bit which talks about how did we kind of mess it all up, and then there's a third section, part 3, which is how do we put it back together again. And I just feel that there's some, you know, terrible kind of decisions that have been made all round about how this relationship has been formed. But also, we don't understand the history of it. We have, you know, the history of the relationship between Islam and Britain goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And one of the things I do is talk about the history of that relationship, where the King of Mercia at one point was having all sorts of problems with the French, and some of the English were kind of rebelling against him. And so he wrote to the Sultan of Morocco. And because, you know, there's this big thing, isn't there, that the Muslims are taking over and they're all coming, and there's going to be an Islamization, and we're all going to be running around in burqas by, you know, whatever, 2050. And the argument that I make in this book is actually they've been coming for hundreds of years. And if you go back, so he writes to the Sultan of Morocco and says, these pesky English are driving me mad, the French are going to invade, I'd really like you to come over and help me, and if you help me, I'll convert to Islam. And I say, oh, you know, we could have been the kind of, you know, the island of Islam back in the 1200s, actually. You know, and this whole relationship between, you know, at one point, I think the kind of Arab Empire was about 200 miles from Dover. This is back in the 9th century, I think.
You didn't realise you're getting a history lesson as well.
So, you know,
we're giving good value to that.
Sorry. So there's these kind of fascinating stories, and how, you know, King George's barber was Turkish, and how Victoria, we've all heard of, you know, Victoria and I've forgotten his name now. Abdul and Victoria. So and how she asked Abdul to bring in copies of the Quran, and she started learning and reading from it. And the court got really vexed because she asked for copies of the Quran for her grandkids, and they thought Victoria was about to convert the grandkids into Muslims. And so, you know, so this kind of history of our relationship goes back such a long way, and these kind of ups and downs in it. And there's a fascinating story recently of a guy in the late 1800s, the mayor of Stockport, Tory mayor of Stockport, who happened to be a Muslim, white guy, convert. And his great-grandson has gone back and traced this story, this kind of dirty family secret that nobody talks about, and eventually found out that this guy was... and some of the oldest, you know, the forefathers of British Islam were aristocrats, white Etonians. And so there's this really fascinating history, and I think the reason I do that is because you can't judge a relationship. And I suppose the other thing I always say is that, you know, we kind of see Islam as this kind of slightly weird alien religion that's arrived here, and they're all a little bit odd and we don't kind of get them. And I'm like, unless Moses was born in Manchester and Jesus was born in Newcastle, why are we so vexed that Muhammad wasn't born in Bradford? I mean, you know, these are all religions that were born somewhere else, came here, and we kind of made them our own, and we created our own version of them. So I think for me, it's saying to Britain, God, get a grip, it's really not happening. And I don't know how many Muslims you know, but you know, most Muslims couldn't organise a piss up in a mocktail bar. You know, you get 3 of them and they've got 6 opinions. And so, you know, they're far more organised. You think they're far more organised than they actually are. But secondly, saying to British Muslims, what does British Islam look like? And there's a phrase that I grew up with when I was a kid, which is that Islam is like a river. It takes the colour of the bed over which it flows. It always has, it always will. And that's why the manifestation of, say, Chinese Muslims is very different to North African Muslims, is very different to Arab Muslims, which will be very different to British Muslims.
Now, I know you're a lot younger than me, but I remember Cat Stevens, who was my hero at the time.
Yeah.
He converted.
Yeah, he did.
And I thought, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then when Cassius Clay did,
Muhammad Ali.
I decided to read up a little bit about it, but The Enemy Within will be better than what I read, I'm sure.
Well, I hope you enjoy. I mean, some of the middle bits get really heavy because it's
a heavy subject.
And the reason that I called it The Enemy Within was because, you know, you'll remember the tragic murder of Drummer Lee Rigby, the terrorist attack when they killed a soldier. And at the time, I was in cabinet, and I used to sit on the National Security Council. And I remember going to the National Security Council meeting to talk about the immediate response and the Cobra meeting, immediate response to that terrorist attack. And this right-wing commentator wrote that, you know, how can Britain deal with the war on terror when we have her, Baroness Warsi, the enemy, at the table? And, you know, I've been called a fair few names in my time, you know, when, you know, you excuse the language, but this was called packy bashing when we were growing up. Was there? You got beaten up, you got chased from school, you got the whole lot. But actually, that really hurt, because here I was in my late 30s at the cabinet table serving my country, and this guy has decided to say to me, aha, but you don't belong, and we don't trust you. And, you know, my instinct was to say in good old, you know, Yorkshire's, frick you. But actually, you know, the answer had to be much more considered, to say, let me explain where this has come from. So in my introduction, I always say it's an insult that hurt, but actually it made for a great title of a book.
Absolutely.
The Enemy Within.
So back to and finish with, before I turn you over to the rabble, because you might have 1 or 2 things to ask. We ended that list with Northern Working Class Mum.
Yeah.
Do you really feel that after the life you've had? Because you've had a big birthday, you've got 4 weddings coming up. No, don't go there. We've got 4 weddings coming up, is that right?
We've got, lots of weddings coming up.
Well, or 1 wedding.
1 wedding with lots of oh God, I don't know if you know anything about Asian weddings. They are crazy. And COVID, where you're saying to your 3 million relatives, actually I can only have 30 of you there, which my daughter is so pleased about. She says, I'm so glad I don't have to call anybody I really don't like, and I don't like most of them. So it's just been really crazy to try and organise a 30 people wedding whilst my daughter gets married. But you know, look, I am a mum. I have 5 wonderful kids. So I'm on my second lap with my second marriage. And so between us, we have 5 wonderful kids and 4 beautiful grandkids as well. And
how do you think you've changed from that fresh-faced woman at Downing Street now to being 50 and...
Are you saying I'm not fresh-faced anymore, Paul?
Would I?
Would you dare? I think I've learnt to not care as much about what other people think. Yeah. I think I'm much more inclined to take even bigger risks, I think. Mm. I think this last year has really taught me that life is quite short. And at 50, you know, I've probably done more than 50% of my life already. Mm. So one of the things that I have decided now is constantly pushing myself outside my comfort zone, which is why I did the stand-up to comedy.
Was I going to mention that? Winner
So
of Channel 4's stand-up comedian.
I am now officially funny.
Yeah, that's what you say to her kids, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Your mother's cool, I'm officially funny.
I'm officially funny. So yeah, I took part in this Stand Up to Cancer thing in aid of cancer research, and it was a competition where we were kind of taught the art of stand-up, and we had to do a live gig at Battersea Arts Centre actually. And yeah, just pushing myself outside my comfort zone and saying, I want to try the things that I wouldn't normally try, but also hoping that my kids and grandkids don't have to fight the battles that we've had to fight. There are moments when I feel quite concerned that things that I thought we'd fought and won.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I genuinely felt in the 90s, I genuinely felt as a British Asian, I genuinely felt, oh my God, this is a real coming of age. We've arrived, we're kind of yuppified, we're starting to have foreign holidays. I'm even thinking about buying a classic car. You know, I mean, like, this is super social mobility. We were real products of social mobility. And I just worry, I think, for the kids and grandkids in a different way. And I actually thought that the bad days of racism had gone, and that actually we were in a much better place.
Yeah,
I think the last few years have been quite uncomfortable to watch again.
Yeah.
And you know, whichever way you voted on Brexit, it's irrelevant now. But I think that whole campaign and post-Brexit, I remember going down to London the day after the Brexit vote for a meeting, and just an icy chill that I'd never felt before. And I asked my husband to wait with me on the train platform. And this is my hometown. And I never thought that's what I would feel again. I remember there was a guy that was interviewed in Barnsley, which is just around the corner from where we live. And I go into Barnsley all the time to do the banking and all sorts. And he was interviewed by, I think it was Channel 4 News. And they said to him, why did you vote Brexit? And he went, I voted Brexit because I just don't want those Muslims here. I voted it. You can still pick it up on YouTube. I just remember thinking, what is this about?
Despair.
Well, I mean, who is that? Is that, you know, and one side of me gives me great hope. So our elder daughter now lives overseas and is unlikely to come back. And she kind of feels like she wants to make home somewhere else. She feels quite uncomfortable about the environment here. And our other daughter is a doctor in the armed forces. So here we have two kids that have made two completely different. One's checked out and said, "Oh my God, I can't deal with this," and the other one's like, "I'm prepared to die for my country." And I just hope that the one that's prepared to die for a country is prepared. 20 years from now, we'll be sat here thinking, "I love my country and I was prepared to die for it, but my country loves me too." Because there are times when I often feel like I love my country, but I'm not sure my country loves me back.
Yeah. Can I finish my bit in typically shallow fashion?
Yeah, sorry. Have I made it all serious now?
Could you give us your favourite line as a stand-up comedian?
Oh.
Because I heard the one about you wanted to become Warsi Hussein and then the Iraq War happened, so you had to put that one off.
Yeah.
But
no, the best line from stand-up was, so my mentor said I really needed to chill out a little bit and try and kind of enjoy time on stage and just tell people, you know, as it was. And he came up with this line, which I use all the time. And the line basically is, you know, "I'm a bothered, I'm a hell, because you guys need to know that I'm the Baroness, bitches." And that's my kind of strap line now. I've got a T-shirt which says, "I'm the Baroness, bitches." And literally, I mean, the kids use it now. "Don't mess with Mom because she's the Baroness, bitches." And so I just think there's something about that phrase, which is the juxtaposition of those two words is so far from each other's.
It's great, isn't it?
But in a way, the juxtaposition of those two words are exactly me, rough and ready, working class girl from Dewsbury who finds herself as a privy councillor sat in the, you know, posh place known as the House of Lords.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose it encompasses my life. Do you think they put it on my tombstone? She was the Baroness, bitches.
Defo. Right, have you got time for just a couple of questions?
Yeah,
Sayeeda?
fire away.
Who has the first question? Wait for the mic.
Oh, sorry.
And who you are and where you come from.
Right. Okay, we're ready. Yeah. Fascinating to listen to you, and thank you for sharing that hour or so with us. Clearly, you've done some amazing things in your life. What's the one thing that you want to do that you haven't done yet, and having sort of listened to you for an hour or so, I'm pretty damn certain that you will do it.
It probably sounds really. Small actually compared to what I've done before, but I can't swim. And I decided that I was going to learn to swim last year, 2020. I was due to be in Melbourne actually for quite a few weeks. And one of the things I was going to do when I was out there was learn to swim. And so I really want to learn to swim.
It's a big swimming pool just over your shoulder over the bridge. You can see.
Just try it. I'm just petrified of water on my face, and I just want to be able to get over that barrier and just learn the skill of. I learned how to ride a bike actually 4 years ago. And again, I mean, it sounds like
you are a late developer, aren't you?
Yeah, you know what? We didn't have anything, and we did not have anything when we were kids, and particularly because you just didn't get things like bikes. And so I never had a bike when I was a kid. We were never taken for swimming lessons when we were kids. And so I learned to ride a bike about 4 or 5 years ago. And so, yeah, I want to learn how to swim.
Could be your lucky there, because I'm a qualified swimming coach.
Exactly.
Who has the next question?
Firstly, thank you. My name's Simon. Just really fascinating hour. An observation from me was the fact you talked about family a lot. And obviously family is very important to you. So I just wondered how that shaped and impacted your political career, and whether there was any sort of particular pillars of beliefs that you've sort of taken away from that and have looked to campaign for.
Yeah. So I think party politics, the family was really interesting. So Mum always voted Tory and Dad voted Labour. In fact, Dad joined the trade union movement when he was part of the mills. And so there was always a lot of political conversation. Culturally, it's really interesting because the Asian, there are certain things that within the English kind of culture you don't do. You don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about money. In the Asian community, you do all three, right? You start off by saying, oh, okay, so, what's your religion? Who do you vote for and how much do you earn? And the first 3 questions every auntie asks you the minute you walk through the door. And it's just completely fair game. I mean, my dad will still say to friends that turn around, oh, so how much do you earn? I'm like, Dad, you can't ask him that, So I think there was a lot of conversation about politics when we were growing up. And I think that debate and discussion made us realise that there were different ways to see things. And then I think probably the single biggest thing, and I hope I don't disrespect anybody by saying this, because people do hit hard times and, you don't know how people's lives turn out. But the one thing that my dad would say to us from day one, but my mum's big catchphrase was, you've got to be better than the boys. She had a big hang-up about having 5 girls and in many ways having failed, because in a very conservative society where the male child was preferred, I think she felt like she hadn't had the male child. So her way of getting back was to say, you've got to be better than the boys. And that stuck with me. And the second thing from my dad was, I never want to see you in that dole queue. And I don't care whether you sweep streets, but you never take from the state. And I think those 2 things were absolutely ingrained to the point where, I didn't understand it, and now I understand state support in a completely different way. But it was almost a kind of a shame thing that he brought us up on, to say, to be dependent on the state was shameful. If you had, and he used to say to us, if you got 2 arms and 2 legs, I don't care what you do, you go out and sweep streets, but you're not dependent on the states. You don't apply for a council house. You don't apply. This was the kind of it was really kind of ingrained in us from a young age. And I couldn't even understand what it was about, but it felt like a really big burden we had to carry around and never ever break these rules. And obviously, try and be better than the boys. Until you realise that actually the boys aren't that good.
I think you succeeded.
Yeah.
Hi, Sayeeda. I'm Jo Fleming. Really enjoyed your interview. Thank you. Your father clearly has played a huge part in influencing your life. And before he came to the UK, can you tell us a little bit more about him and his childhood and how he grew up and what made him come over here?
So his father was orphaned quite young, and in Pakistan, where he came from, the only thing that you could rely upon was land, and his father, because he was orphaned, didn't have any land, and so his father joined the British Indian Army, And after the Second World War, when he came back, he had a small pension and they had no land. So they really didn't have a source of income. And so he was one of 8 siblings. And they didn't, I mean, you know, literally, if you had 2 meals a day, they thought they'd done really well. And so from a very young age, he felt that sense of being the poor relative. He said that they were the poorest people in the family, the poorest people in the kind of area, and he felt quite humiliated and embarrassed by that. And his single biggest thing was he wanted to be able to sit as an equal with his cousins and his uncles when he grew up, and he felt that the only way he could do that was to work. And so when he was very young, still a teenager, he left home, went to the city, Karachi, and from there he organised to try and leave to come to Britain, because Britain at the time was recruiting for the mills. And he said he was really excited when he got that call, but then it was all delayed by about 24 hours because Jackie Kennedy apparently went to Karachi and the whole world came to a standstill. So that was the way I kind of traced back when he'd left, because he said Jackie Kennedy was in Karachi the day before he left. And then he arrived here, and I think it was just, his ability to work is phenomenal, and I think it comes from, he never ever forgets where he came from. I think it's so deep and ingrained. But he didn't turn that into a sob story, he turned that into positive action. Because occasionally we'll say something like, you know, occasionally my daughter will come back and say, oh my dad, you know, Baba, I've had a 12-hour shift, I've had a 17-hour shift, and he'll say, well, when I came to this country, you know, so, and it's a long-standing joke now with all the grandkids, like, you know, you can say you climbed Everest, but he'll have climbed a mountain higher than you ever climbed, and he'll have worked harder than you ever worked, and he'll have, and I think in a way it's great for the kids to hear that. But that strong work ethic and that sense of, and he takes such pride in their achievements, even now. He's so pushy, even now. You know, like today he's been, well, you know, how are the exams going? What have the kids got? The day the results are out, he's there on the phone before everybody else wants to know what their grades are. And it's constant, you know, push. And I just think he's a phenomenal human being.
Force of nature. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
he is. Yeah, and his 80s and still young. His zest for life is amazing. We take
There's
them
the
away on
secret
holiday
then,
quite
guys.
a lot. It is, yeah. Zest for life. We take him away on holiday, and oh God, he doesn't let you have a lie-in. He's there waiting, you know, with his feet in the pool before you know, like where we're going today. And I said, Dad, it's like having a child. What do you mean? We're going to have a down day? What? You're going to sit in the villa all day and waste the whole day away? I'm like, Dad, can we just have a day out? But he wants to do everything all the time. Travel the world even now, see, as he says, he wants to see as much of God's creations before he goes to God.
Brilliant, thank you.
Penultimate question, because I get the last one. Oh, well, we better take the 2 then.
Sure,
Antonio
fancy.
and Kath. We've got the chair of the steering group here, so she better have the last one.
Okay, yeah. So thank you so much, Baroness. My question to you is, you're so inspiring to young girls and women of diverse background. What more can we do to inspire them to get into politics, into business, or into employment? Because I feel there's a lot more that we can do as a business community, or just in general as a nation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, so I have a phrase where I say you can't be what you can't see. And I think it's really important, not just for women or women of colour, but, you know, women generally, men of colour. I think you've just got to be able to see yourself. I remember when I was growing up, the only people we saw on television were Trevor McDonald, Floella Benjamin, and John Barnes, right? So I'm a lifelong Liverpool fan because of John Barnes. And, you know, you had to, and even though I'm not black, I'm Asian, but that was the only version of non-white I saw on the television. And so I genuinely believe that you've got, you know, whether it's class, gender, race, whatever it is, people have to see versions of yourself. And that's why that outfit outside number 10 was so important, because it meant so much to so many people, but an outfit that they would never have dared to wear publicly, but they'd wear it privately, and suddenly they felt they could be themselves. So I think that's really important. Business is phenomenal. Look, anybody can run a business. You can run it from anywhere. You don't have to have had all the university degrees to it. Some of the best entrepreneurs didn't go to university. So I think we have to start telling people that you have to work out what your skill set is and monetize it. And that's effectively business. How do you monetize your skill set? And what's the purpose of it? Because the minute you monetize your skill set, you've got the freedom to then do lots of other things off the back of it. And so I think that those two kind of really strong messages of monetizing your skill set and the freedom that comes with that have got to really be kind of drilled home. And I'm shocked actually. So I teach my kids to budget from a very early age, what that means, why that's important, get them to keep records, get them, it sounds crazy, but quite young kids end up getting credit cards, American Express even, save flight points, the whole lot, because they need to know what are the different types of mortgages, how does finance work, what is budgeting, why is this important? If you can't read, I'm shocked that we don't teach people how to read a balance sheet or a profit and loss account. I mean, these are basic things we should be teaching everybody. At some point, you are going to have to do this. Even if all you do is manage your own finances. Why don't we tell people about credit and debt and what that means and pensions and all of this financial information should be given to kids, especially before they leave. I mean, this should be in their heads before they leave 16. And I'm shocked that we still don't do it.
Kath?
I'm Kath Lavery and I do chair the Business Week Steering Group, but I also chair Yorkshire Ambulance. And the NHS is a massively diverse employer, Yorkshire Ambulance is. But as you go further up the hierarchy, it becomes whiter and maler, to be quite honest. And there's nothing wrong with my male colleagues, nothing at all. They're wonderful people. But we've been struggling for a long time with diversity of leadership in the NHS, and when I think about it, as you were speaking, in the country as a whole, actually. So in that comment that you said that says ask, what really should we be doing? I mean, we're trying very hard to diversify our boards in the NHS, and I think lots of people are trying very hard to represent Britain in our leadership bodies, but we're not succeeding particularly well. Are we? I mean, women are still in huge minority. People from minority ethnic communities even more so. What should we be doing we're not doing?
Yeah. Okay, so I always work this question backwards. Why should we do it? And the reason why I say the reason why is because the more diverse your team, the different experiences your team brings to the table, the more robust that decision making is going to be. When you get into groupthink, I mean, God, we've only had to watch Dominic Cummings these last couple of days to realise when you get into groupthink what happens. If you're all from the same background with the same kind of experience, you're going to think in exactly the same way, and nobody's going to be brave enough to be able to say, well, actually, no, have you seen it in this way? Have you thought about it in that way? So, I'm not one of these that says, oh, well, it's just has to be because you have to have so many white people and so many black people and so many. No, because ultimately every single, and I can give you all the research on it. You know what the research is. Companies make more money, they operate better decision making, all of that stuff starts to come in. So I think it's about making sure that each institution, organisation understands the value of what it does. Otherwise, it will do it begrudgingly, and it will only be skin deep. So they'll say, oh, well, we've now got our kind of token woman or our token black person or our token whatever. And then you think, well, no, actually, you don't sit in a room and think, well, we've got our token white bloke, now we can just move on to taking on other people. Why is it that way? The second thing is there is the fear from within those groups. So I do a lot of work with women who, there's this real sense of unless you can satisfy all 10 criteria on a job spec, women won't apply for it. Whereas a bloke will look at it and see 3 and think, oh, I can do 3 out of 10, that's me, I've got that job. And so the phrase I always use is if Donald Trump woke up one morning with as rubbish and incompetent as he is and decided he could be president of the United States, my God, any one of us can do anything. I mean, I could fly a rocket to the moon after that, right? If he thought he was capable of doing that, somewhere in his deep psyche, he thought that. And I remember when I was doing my book tour, I got asked a question, which I thought was actually quite a bizarre question, very early on when we were doing a Q&A. And this chap said to me, and I won't name him, he said, is a national broadcaster. He said, oh, you talk about lack of diversity, but some people would say you only got to where you got to because you are a brown woman, and therefore you managed to climb up and have great success. And I said, yeah, some people might say that, but I'll tell you one thing, if I was a white bloke from Eton, I'd have been freaking Prime Minister, right? Because I was good enough to be Prime Minister. But I knew I could only get so far because I didn't fit the type. So I think some of it has got to come from self-belief. And I do talk to a lot of people from BAME communities and from women and say, do you kind of rule yourself out? Because there is a lot of ruling out of yourself because you think, so what do you do in those circumstances? Well, you do what's always happened, which is you get a tap on the shoulder. You know, a lot of blokes that get jobs don't get jobs because they've been through a process and they've fit every criteria. It's because somebody down the golf club has tapped them on the shoulder and said, oh, there's a board appointment coming. I think you'd be really good for it. Yeah, I'll put you in. Well, let's just kind of cut through some of this rubbish and just appoint these people into these positions. And then let them just get on with it. We know they can do it. So I just think that we've got to be a little bit more proactive. And if you're in a position of leadership, so one of the things I used to do when I was in the Foreign Office was that I would, if I ever saw a really good write-up or a presentation or a brief from somebody, and it was a woman or a minority ethnic person, I would go and find them in the bowels of the Foreign Office somewhere. They'd be hiding out in some little office. I'd speak to them, and then I would bring them in on high-profile, sexy projects. Because the minute you bring them in on high-profile, they get noticed because that project gets noticed. So I think there are ways in which you as leaders can go out and find those people and just bring them in. And, you know, some of the public sector kind of appointments are still kind of done in a very odd way. And, you know, it's whether you've actually got the confidence to say, well, actually, I want that person on my board and I'm going to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Absolutely true.
Well, way over time, what do you know? I hope the force of nature is your dad knows that force of nature lives in you. Do you think he knows that?
I think he does. I'm definitely his favourite. Winds all the others up. Winds all the others up all the time.
Well, I'm just so glad, A, that when I asked you if you'd do it, you said yes. And then when I chanced asking you whether you'd come over and do it in person here, I'm so delighted you said.
It wasn't a chance. Paul hounded me for the last month, guys. Let's put this on record. He gave me no. I'm really glad you actually. He stuck with it and he said you'll have such a great time. Come along, and I said that to you, didn't I? I walked through this door this morning. I met a human being, and I just thought, you know, I don't know why I wanted to do this on Zoom. I'm really, really glad you actually persuaded me to come here, and I'm really glad you invited me to be here.
Sayeeda, it's been a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.